China has released its white paper on China and the WTO to review and outline its active participation in the global trade network. As international relations, especially global trade, is undergoing profound changes, safeguarding multilateralism and free trade is not only at stake for China, but for the planet. Moreover, upgraded reform and free trade zones in China are creating tremendous opportunities for the world. So how pivotal has China's role been in the WTO during the past 17 years? How will multilateralism and the free trade be protected? And what does China's new development impulse mean for the world economy? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to have Mr. Tu Xinquan, who is the Dean of the China Institute for WTO Studies from the University of International Business and Economics, Mr. Andy Mock, who is the founder of Red Pagoda Resources, and Mr. William Spears, a UK specialist at Spearhead China Limited. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Mr. Tu, what's the background against which this release of the white paper on China WTO happened?
I think the basic situation is the world trading system is at risk, especially since in this year the United States has launched several trade wars against a lot of a series of WTO members, including China, EU, Canada, Mexico. And especially in the last 2 years, the U.S. government has released several reports with a lot of accusations of China's WTO commitment compliance, China's economic system. So, and I think a lot of them are baseless and against the fact. So I think it is necessary for the Chinese government to publish such a report to explain to the world that China has actually complied with WTO rules very sufficiently, and China has contributed a lot to the world trade development.
Well, obviously, the release of this white paper aims to defend China's position and help defend the mechanism and functions of the WTO. But what do you think of the impact? Do you think China would possibly persuade our American partners that you got a wrong job done?
That's a really good question because, of course, America and China have very different internal systems, and China in the last 17 years has done so much towards WTO. In actual fact, the WTO was the, let's say, the catalyst for China to develop so quickly, which is really very, very fortunate. And now, with China now also lowering tariffs for many other countries, it is wishing to develop free trade. The big problem is with America. Unfortunately, of course, it reaped the benefits of using the manufacturing base of China for so many years, but it now sees it as a, let's say, a challenge to its own internal way of being. And now I believe America is mixing politics with economics, which is not good.
Andy, how do you assess the impact of this white paper?
Well, I think it signals something that I think is incredibly ironic in that the U.S., for most of the post-World War II period, was both the champion and the evangelist for a rules-based global trading system. And now the roles are completely reversed in that China now is on the side of the world except the U.S. And I think the U.S. has taken the stance of, to use a vulgar term that is very current in Trump political circles, "We're America, bitch." meaning that it's the U.S. against the world, whether that's China, whether that's the EU, whether that's Canada, whether that's Mexico. And I think it's unfortunate, but I think China has now become bearing the flag of free trade and a rules-based system.
From Western perspectives, Mr. Spears, has China honored its promises after being admitted to the WTO?
China is on a journey, and in the last 17 years China has come a long, long way, and I believe that it's getting very, very close to honouring those commitments. In actual fact, I think probably in many areas, because China is such a big country, it has actually committed and developed to the degree of the WTO standards. The WTO was there to ensure that there was free trade between all countries in the world. And I think with China now releasing or lowering its tariffs, it's really demonstrating it wants free trade around the world. The EU recognise it, the UK recognises China's position, and we want to ensure that China just makes a big difference to the world, and it can do very much.
In the vocabulary of WTO concerning global trade, do you think we have two catchphrases? One is a free trade, the other fair trade. And the American administrations have been emphasizing a lot the importance of a fair trade. It seems that this looks like a beautiful camouflage to fundamentally serve the national interests of the United States. And do you think they have any ring of truth in their official statement?
I think, of course, fairness is important, but fairness is supposed to be defined by rules. I mean, the WTO rules are made by all WTO members. Every member accepts this set of rules, and actually in the WTO rules there are some agreements about so-called fair competition, like anti-dumping agreement, countervailing agreement. All members have accepted that these rules. So I think, of course, as I said, a single member has no authority to define what is fair, what is not fair. We have to respect the existing rules made by all members.
Among all others, I'm afraid the most controversial case between the United States and China is the role of the visible hand. The industrial policies by Chinese authorities in encouraging, for example, investment in high technology and solar panel production. So, as Mr. Spear said correctly, United States and China have two entirely different internal systems. What should be done to justify the individual courses on both sides? I mean, China says what we have done is in compliance with our national conditions, and yours is free, liberal market economy. So what do you make of the differences and disputes?
Yeah, actually, I think there is no uniform definition of market economy. There are a lot of different market economy systems, I think. And in the WTO, as you said, regarding industrial policy, especially subsidies, there are already rules. The subsidy agreement, which classify subsidies into different categories. And there are different rules on different subsidies. I think it is fair to say that China's industrial policy in some sectors could be possibly not so fully in compliant with WTO rules. But as I said, there are already rules. You can file cases against China in the WTO. Actually, there are already some cases against China. For example, in the case of wind power subsidies against China. And China accepted this case and revised our policy regarding subsidies to wind power industry. So, I mean, I think China is willing to comply with existing WTO rules. But of course, now the thing is, the U.S., especially the United States, wants to explain the rules by himself. So this is what we do not agree.
Andy, in my living memory, the United States and perhaps some European economies have launched the anti-dumping, anti-subsidy investigations against special steel, tires, and so on and so forth that they import from China. That somehow explains yet another controversial point that China is not a full-fledged market economic status, and that gives the rise to, for example, citing a third country as a proxy to judge whether we have dumped our overcapacity into the partner economy. So what do you make of the international concerns? Many economies refuse to accept China as a full-fledged market economy. The United States, European Union, and even some of the emerging markets refuse to do so.
Well, I think it's a bit of a red herring because a market-based economy, a market economy, is really only exists in theory. I mean, when we look at a country like the United States, I mean, it has subsidies, various types of government supports as well. Every country does. So I think that it's a little bit of as I said, a red herring to focus on these types of issues. I think the more fundamental problem is that the U.S. and China have two profoundly different systems. And the U.S., I think on the one hand, has a certain amount of arrogance to say that everyone in the world should have the kind of system we have, but also a kind of a paranoia that the U.S. does not feel safe if there's another system thriving that is different from its own. So I think really what has to change is the worldview of the United States, in a sense to become more mature, more tolerant, and I think more accepting that there is more than one system that can work.
Not possibly in the Trump administration, during his administration, that anything could change fundamentally to get integrated into the world trade regime. Are you optimistic that the next generation of American leadership will respect WTO rules and will not adhere unilaterally to their trade protectionism, which amounts to a matter of unilateralism, so to speak?
Well, we have to remember that, of course, Donald Trump is a very different president, and he has actually been the first president in 70 years who's actually got rid of so many WTO rules. But also, if you also think that every country goes through a learning curve, and I think this is a learning curve for America. It went from one side to the other side very, very quickly, and in actual fact, Donald Trump is a businessman, and he's running his country like a business, intuitively, from his point of view. Now, that may not benefit internally in the long term. So I think the next generation of people from America will understand that China is no threat, will understand that we have different cultures to America and China, and they will have more of an open mind, I'm sure of that. But that will take time. It won't be within the next few years.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Tu Jingquan, Mr. William Spears, and Mr. Andy Mock. We're discussing why Chinese government has decided to release a white paper on the WTO and China. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We learned that China will soon take another round of solid steps to promote its liberalization policies by lowering import tariffs for many categories like automobiles and easing market access, while new measures on intellectual property protection and a new negative list for market access of foreign investment are in the pipeline. Question is, Mr. Tu, what is the general picture of China's further deep reform and opening up? Many privately say, hey, the trade war may serve our national interest by forcing China, quote-unquote, to further open up its economy, I mean, its market. Do you agree?
Well, actually, since China's WTO accession, actually, China has, first of all, fulfilled the WTO obligations to open its market. But at the same time, we have promoted our opening up through different approaches, like bilateral FTA, regional FTA, and also is some unilateral opening up, like lower tariffs unilaterally. But especially from the U.S. perspective and some also some developed countries' perspective, they think that China has developed so fast, but its opening up is kind of slower than expected. So I think we could understand such kind of concerns. So to some extent, I think foreign pressure could be used as a stimulus to promote our opening up faster. Actually, in the WTO accession negotiation, using foreign pressure to promote domestic reform is a very important kind of factor behind that. So, but one thing is we do not accept unilateral sanctions or unilateral punishment. Yeah, that's what I.
Well, the Americans, unlike Europeans, prefer to use not a carrot but sticks in forcing their partners to go to the negotiating table and talk about not a compromise, but something that will definitely be in favor of the United States. Having said this, a timetable, it seems, a timetable for China's further liberalization of its financial sector was disclosed by Chinese leaders, particularly President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of the Boao Forum of Asia this year. What are these landmark measures and simultaneously concerns for foreign direct investment?
Xi Jinping is a great visionary, and he really lays the base of the future for China. And as far as the UK is concerned, we are very, very, very happy to come with China to encourage their internal, say, internal systems to become more worldly, if you wish. That's probably the term to put it. And the more worldly the systems within China become, the more, let's say, the more trusted people will come and invest in China. And that's going to be another gentle process. It started already. It was started a long time ago. But it has to be seen to be working, and more investment will definitely come in my opinion.
Well, the internal system of China may be subject to more policy debates across the Atlantic Ocean. But at the same time, it seems European politicians have growing suspicions about the Belt and Road Initiative, laying emphasis on, for example, transparency, rule of law, so on and so forth. What do you think of, the different interpretations about the vision of President Xi Jinping? Well, you said Mr. Xi Jinping is a great visionary.
Very much so. Going back to the European Union, basically it's a gathering together of countries to improve their situation. With the Belt and Road Initiative, it's very good to bring developing countries together so they can have free trade and improve the conditions of their own populations. So I see it as a two-way thing. China will gain, and the countries along the Belt and Road will gradually gain their positions.
China and the EU, Mr. Spears, have both voiced their firm objections to US tariffs on steel and aluminum and are expected to collaborate more closely to uphold multilateralism on free trade. What kind of fields can these two entities cooperate on, and what enlarging economic differences across the Atlantic Ocean are most likely to occur?
Well, I'm a UK resident and person, so I have very differing views to what happens in America. And UK, from its perspective, had its own problems, for example, with the steel and what have you. And we would probably welcome Chinese investment to get that better, to improve the position, because in China you have the greatest technology in steel, and that needs to be developed all over the world. The big problem with the protectionism, like in the 1920s, when America totally put up total tariffs, we went into recession. So therefore we've got to be very careful not to do that again, even though, of course, we're in a different position globally. Mm-hmm. And China has a big internal market that is going to be developed, and that will provide China and the Chinese people with a much better future.
And the furthering the opening up of the country's financial sector will accelerate the reshuffling of Chinese industry, help optimize structure and improve efficiency, turn high savings into effective investment, and promote the quality of financial services. The question is, what would be needed actions for Chinese regulatory authorities to adopt?
Well, I think there's two areas of development here. So one, I think, is domestic capital market reform. So whether that's the equity markets or the bond markets, that there's still room for improvement, both in terms of the structures as well as the actual securities that are being issued. I think the second area then is the linkages to markets outside of China. So I think when there is freer flow of capital across borders, that leads to greater efficiency, less arbitrage opportunities, so better pricing if we want to be very geeky about the economic value of this. And I think then the Chinese government regulatory agencies need to, in parallel, develop the policies, the regulations, the training of the staff along with that, so that they're not holding back the healthy market developments of the financial sector. But I think also not letting it get too far ahead, as we see in the financial crisis in the U.S. as well, when there isn't proactive regulation. So we see here in China the early identification of these so-called gray rhinos and reining in of too much debt, being over-leveraged. So I think both of these need to happen, and we can see it unfolding today as we speak.
Mr. Spears, do you expect overseas investment to be seen in the Chinese financial market as a result of the preferential policies that Xi Jinping unveiled at the Global Forum for Asia, for example, in the service industry and the insurance industry? A lot more will be done very quickly to open up the door. And what do you think of the capital market? Will it be the capital account? Will it be further opened?
Well, interestingly, we had from the UK a delegation from the financial services industry quite recently, and they are very, very keen. Excuse me. They are very, very keen to become more involved. But it takes time. People have to build friendships. They have to understand each other's internal way of working, which is slightly different in China because it's developing. And I think that there's going to be much more investment gradually. But it will take time, unfortunately. Nothing comes quickly. An instant hit is not necessarily the best beneficial hit. Short-term gain sometimes is long-term pain.
China has been accused of violating IPR, intellectual property rights. Do you think China has made substantial progress, or there's a lot more that needs to be done?
Actually, upon the accession to the WTO, China has revised its all IPR laws and regulations according to WTO rules. So in this perspective, actually China has complied with WTO rules already. But another important thing is implementation. Actually, that thing I think is not so perfect. But I think that that's not because of the unwillingness. It's rather than because of capability and capacity. I think the Chinese government need to input more resources to IPR protection implementation. For example, to have more IPR protection implementation staff, to establish more IPR courts, and I think also we need more international cooperation to build our capacity in IPR protection. So in this sense, I think international cooperation with other developed countries, especially the US, the EU, to help us to increase, to enhance our capacity. So, and another thing is, especially, I think now the Chinese government is trying to establish innovative society or innovative economy. So this is already our internal demand to have better IPR protection. So, as I said, we don't need to doubt our willingness. It's just we need to help the Chinese government to enhance its capability.
The anger of President Donald Trump focuses on the alleged coercive high technology transfer if the U.S. companies want to have a bigger share of the Chinese market. And China says no. It's just a deal of the willing. You like to enter into the Chinese market, and I would love to benefit from your technology. It's based on the spirit of a contract. There's nothing wrong with this, but the United States says no, it should no longer be the case. As a British citizen, an expert on the sort of things, what do you think of the American concerns?
I think they're unfounded, very unfounded. For example, the UK were very prepared to share our technology at a price, obviously, or a convenient working relationship. Donald Trump himself has to have the backing of his nation to be re-elected, in my opinion. So he's going for the jugular, basically, so that people say, okay. What you must also remember, the latest tax review in America, it was only the rich people who gained, and the poor people got poorer. In China, you've seen so many people come from poverty to middle class and become much richer. So there's a very different psyche here. And with President Trump, unfortunately, he's lost it, in my opinion, for a moment. It may come back. You know, it may be just a game he's playing. I'm not sure. But I think from the UK perspective, we would very much like to develop our UK technology with China, and also to make the world a better place.
At this moment, the Republicans of the DC overwhelmingly support their president, Donald Trump, because he has somehow honored his campaign pledges. Now, having said this, what do you think of yet another case that's caused a lot of controversies between the two sides, the United States and China, the joint venture idea? Since day one of our beginning, we preferred, you know, to have this joint business entities, but the President Trump says enough is enough. We have zero tolerance for this business practice of the Chinese government. What do you think?
Well, I think this is, you know, as an American, I hate to say this, but I think this is not going to turn out well for the United States, because the U.S. is fortunate in that it is a big continental market that could successfully pursue an isolationist strategy. The outcome will be higher prices, less choice for consumers. But what we can see happening today, even before these tariffs are actually imposed, that soybean farmers in the U.S. are being hurt, supply chains are being rerouted, and once these new patterns are set, I think they'll be difficult to change. So where I think we can see this heading is that the U.S. will isolate itself, supply chains between Europe, between the EU and China, and as Africa develops, Southeast Asia, that the rest of the world will continue to benefit from a rules-based global trading system, free trade, but the U.S. might wall itself off and still be okay, but I think we'll fall behind.
We hope, we keep our fingers crossed, that the release of this white paper would put the current blame game to an end in a constructive and peaceful manner. Hopefully the trade war will be narrowly averted. Until next time, goodbye.